We are here to celebrate 130 years of NBA ministry. Is that awesome? We are going to share stories today. There's an esteemed panel here. We're going to see. We're going to see videos. We're just going to have fun. We really are. And there's going to be a time when we ask you to share stories as well. Historically, NBA has served in the name of the Christian church and in the name of a sacred and holy God. So it's very fitting and proper at this point that we ask Reverend Suzanne Webb to come forward for our opening prayer.
Oh, gracious God, we've come to celebrate an amazing, amazing ministry. You have challenged us, you have loved us, you have led us. We remember with deep respect those 6 women who started this incredible ministry. And through the years, through the 130 years, how this organization has changed, developed, grown, been in everybody's life in the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ.
Amen. We are so grateful for your leadership and your ministry. At this time, we would like to share a recording from the Reverend Dr. Sharon Watkins, our General Minister and President of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ.
I was thinking about this, and my connection with NBA goes back a long way. I think, and I don't even remember when I became completely aware of what was particular ministries associated with NBA and when I really knew that it was part of that. But as I think back, my very first memories are of the Woodhaven Bell Choir. And that would have gone back like 40 years to remember that. And that seems to be my first connection. I also remember being connected with NBA through Oklahoma Christian Home during my years in Oklahoma, serving on the Oklahoma Regional Board as Phillips representative, and that we often would meet at Oklahoma Christian Home, and just being aware of many of the connections through people there who lived there and worked there, the amazing leadership that came to the Oklahoma region through Oklahoma Christian Home. I was connected with NBA through Miracle Days. I remember that also in Oklahoma particularly, and how much fun that was, and have been involved with Miracle Days since then, even while I've been in this role too, in different parts of the country.
What a wonderful reflection. We will be sharing several videos and audio recordings with you today. Should you want to hear more like this, these stories and more can be found on NBA's History microsite. Never heard of a microsite? That is the website that the NBA marketing team has created to house and to commemorate the stories being collected this 130th year and beyond. And now, without any further ado, let's begin with some introductions of our panel of storytellers. I will invite each of our storytellers to share a bit about yourselves. Here's what we would like to learn about you. Tell us your name, the city and state where you live. Briefly describe your connection with the NBA, and again, briefly answer the question at 10 a.m., not p.m., 10 a.m. on a typical weekday. Where would we find you? And I will start, just to give you a little chance to formulate those wonderful answers. I am Norma Ellington Twitty, and I live in Olivet, a Central Corridor suburb of St. Louis. Many of you know about my MBA connection as Vice President of Program Planning and Evaluation. from 1985 to 2000. However, many of you may not know about my first NBA connection. This occurred in the late 1970s when I served on an NBA National Convocation Task Force. The purpose of the task force was to recommend how to spend monies NBA had raised in the 1950s to construct a home for Negro-aged and a home for Negro children. That's a teaser. You're going to hear more about that later. I also served on the NBA Board of Trustees prior to serving as NBA Vice President. At 10 a.m. on Monday and Wednesday, I should be leaving home for my exercise class. I'm probably not, but I should be. On Tuesday, I would be at Bible Study Fellowship, a non-denominational international Bible study program that is absolutely fabulous. Janice, I invite you to share a little bit about yourself.
My name is Janice Lance, and my connection with NBA is that I was married to Rick. And I live at Foxwood Springs, former NBA facility, and I love it. And that's in Raymore, Missouri. And at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'm either at a meeting or walking my new rescue dog, who weighs 88 pounds. She usually walks me.
Okay, I'm Bob Cooper. I live in Golden, Colorado, and my connection with NBA started when I lived in Omaha as a child growing up there, and became aware of the Child Saving Institute, and Don Brewer, who was the executive there, was my Sunday school teacher at the Disciple Church in Omaha. And then later, after I graduated from college, I went to work for Don Brewer at the what was called then the Colorado Christian Home in Denver, Colorado. I thought we were supposed to answer in terms of 10 o'clock on a typical day when I was working. And so, because 10 o'clock now, I'm still probably reading the paper to figure out what I'm trying to do. One of the last people on earth, I think, that reads a paper. But at 10 o'clock on a typical weekday, when I first started at the Colorado Christian Home, that might be a Monday. And at that time, I was what we called a child care worker in one of the cottages that was caring for a group of 8 boys. And the schedule then called for you to come on duty as a worker at 4 o'clock on Friday afternoon. And you would have the kids all to yourself until noon on Sunday when somebody else came in to be with you in the afternoon. And then at 10 o'clock on Monday morning, you got off duty and you collapsed. And so what I recall about that is one of my very first day at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, everybody else that was working with me went home and they said, oh, by the way, you're in charge of dinner. And so I called my mother. I don't know if it was legal to use the office's call, but I called my mother because I've been eating hot dogs and grilled cheese sandwiches for 4 years. And she coached me through how I could make some spaghetti.
Good afternoon. My name is Marion Kegler, and I am from Kansas City, Missouri. And I will describe my connection with Indiana on several levels. The first thing is I used to work as an administrator at K. David Cole Place, which was part of NBA. And so I have a connector there. I am currently on the Board of Trustees right now for NBA, and it's a great group of organization, and I love it, and I love everyone who's connected to NBA. If I were in Kansas City at 10 o'clock on a.m. on any given day, I'm an early riser. I get up at 5 a.m. generally. I do my devotions, and then I start my day. So by 10 o'clock, I've already been to one meeting from one something or I'm preparing to go to another meeting that starts around 11 or 1 o'clock. And so by 2 o'clock, being a senior citizen, I am back home and relaxing because I've already done everything else that everybody else wants to do or should do.
Okay, thank you for that.
Hi there, Mark Anderson. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri. It is my pleasure to serve as the president of National Benevolent Association. I've been in this role for 6.5 years, but my connection before that is I worked for 1 year, a stint. I started in October of '99 until October of 2000, almost to the date. And I was the Associate Vice President for Children and Family Services. For those of you that know Cheryl Dow Palmer, she was my boss. So I had the pleasure and joy of working with her, and as well as Bob Cooper when he was at Colorado Christian Home.
All right.
Oh, 10 a.m., 10 a.m. I am looking at my email thinking, gosh, I really should look back and see if I can catch up on those January emails.
Well, now the fun really begins. We're going to start our sharing of stories, and we are going to start with Janice Lance, and we want you to share your recollections of your dear and wonderful husband.
Thank you. Well, I'll start by telling you when we entered in NBA. Rick retired from the military after 23 years. And as I recall, he retired on a Friday and started at Child Saving Institute on a Monday, so there was not too much lapse time there. And he started work there as the CEO. And one of his first challenges was getting a suit and tie and everything together in the morning because he'd worn a uniform for 23 years and he didn't have any decisions to make. And he also told me in the first weeks, he said, there's no men there because they were all women social workers, a wonderful Donna Hager, which you all knew. And anyway, he adjusted to that and bonded, and they had a wonderful team effort there and did great programs. And he was at CSI for, I can't remember now, 4 or 5 years. And the job came up at Kansas Christian Home in Newton, Kansas, and that was near both our families, so we decided to take it, make the move. It was kind of hard to leave Omaha. We'd been there, considering the military and the time at CSI, we'd been there 13 years. And so it's kind of hard to leave there. But we had a great time in Newton, Kansas. We loved the small town, and Kansas Christian Home was a great facility, and it was just a good move for us. And after, I think 5 years or something, I'm not clear on all the time, but I think about 5 years, Bill Gibble was decided to retire. And so they asked Rick to interview for the presidency. And so he drove up to Kansas City and met the committee in the airport and interviewed. And a few days later then, he got a call from one of the committee members who lived in Atlanta. And he said, I want to come and talk to you about the position, and offer you the position, and set up a time to come and talk to you if you'll tell me where in the world Newton, Kansas is. So anyway, he came, and Rick took the job, and he moved to St. Louis a year before the girls and I did, because it was Missy, who's here, her senior year. And so we stayed there, and he came back from St. Louis to Newton on as many weekends as he could. And Rick rented a small apartment in South St. Louis and didn't have a garage, just had on-street parking. And he went out one morning to get in the car to go to work, and his car was gone. And so he got initiated into big city life. And by the time the police found the car a couple of days later, it was stripped of everything but the steering wheel, I think. So anyway, that was when NBA was downtown. And then shortly after that, Ted Beasley gave the money for the Beasley building, and then that became, the building was built, and that was the NBA headquarters. And one of the things, moments I remember that stand out was the dedication of the Beasley building. And they had a great big tent set up outside where we all sat, and a terrible, terrible windstorm came up, almost like a tornado. And some of the staff went behind the tent to hold it down. And Mrs. Beasley, who was a beautiful Southern lady, turned to me in her soft Southern drawl and said, "I didn't know if it was going to be a dedication or an ascension." That was a great moment. And there were some, of course, difficult times through the years, but they always weathered through it, the staff. And there were some top of the mountain moments, like the 100th anniversary. And for Rick and for our family, one of the most wonderful moments of all, not moments, times, was his retirement party. And that was a moment that we cherished forever, a memory. So it was, but what I remember the most about the years in NBA, and Rick would say that if he was here, is the staff. Not only at headquarters, but throughout the facilities. And not only were they so professional and skilled, but their commitment and their dedication was just amazing. They worked tirelessly, the hours, long hours, and road trips and all that. But just anything it took to get the job done. And I think for all of them, it was not just a job, it was a purpose. And they knew that they had a part in making the people that NBA served, making their lives better. And they really lived the NBA motto, what they did best was care. And it was a beautiful thing to see. And I think that I like to think now of maybe those 6 women up in heaven, and Bill Gibble and Orville Peterson and Rick and Dwayne Moon and oh gosh, all of Lauren Richter and Paul Kennedy and all the ones that have gone ahead, getting together maybe and telling NBA stories and talking about how proud they were to have been a part of the NBA story, because it was a good one and still is. I'm glad it's going on.
Oh, Janice, thank you. I am a Janice Lance fan. If you worked for Rick, she was a part of the package. And we didn't see her a lot, but we savored our Janice Lance moments. There was wisdom, there was wit, and there was warmth. And we are just so glad you're here with us. We are so glad you're here. Now it's your turn. Many of you have memories of serving with Rick Lance that you might like to share. Is there an image, word, or memory that you would lift up and celebrate about his leadership and about this era of NBA ministries? We only have 10 minutes, and we're asking that you keep it at 2 minutes if you can. And so when you rise, share your name and briefly your NBA connection.
My name is Andy Ulrich. I'm a graduate of NBA. On my 9th birthday, I went to the orphanage. It was called Christian Orphanage Home, and I think they changed it to St. Louis Christian Home. And my parents passed away in 36 and 37, and so my sister and 2 brothers joined me. Had a great experience there, probably developed my skills as a baseball player, and gained a lot of friends. And there's not too many of them left, because when you think about 1938, you know how old we were. But it was a great privilege, and I do have one friend that's living in the St. Louis area, John Martinez. The family, I think, originally came from Mexico. They lived in Kansas City, and somehow or other they ended up in the orphanage. There was, let's see, 3 boys, 1 girl. And at the time I was in the orphanage, I think there was 100 children there. But I believe, as my sister told me recently, we were the only orphans. And it's been a privilege to share that with you. Thank you. Oh, by the way, I also just got back from Denver, and I attended Central Christian Church. Our former pastor, Rhodes Thompson, served as interim there for a while. And I had thought about the Colorado Christian Home, but I didn't get out there. But it's been a great experience, and I would like to see, if I can catch Mark's ear, I'd like to see more young people involved in NBA. Thank goodness for Explore. Thank you.
Right here, April.
Hi, I'm Patricia Clark, originally from Cleveland, Ohio, but was recruited several years ago to work or serve as a volunteer member of the Affirmative Action Committee. And so many years I was coming back and forth to St. Louis to serve on that committee with Dr. Fox, and Bill Gibble, and then Rick Lance, and met Araminta Smith, who was the director of Minority Concerns. And I just adored her spirit. I loved her when she came to Cleveland to serve, representing NBA, to fight Shaker Heights City, who said, we don't want to serve any old, poor people in Shaker Heights. And so Araminta came back and forth, and I was able to be mentored by her to see what difference we could make to convince a city that old, low-income people were going to be valuable in their city. And I'm just so pleased each time I get to visit Cleveland to see our original NBA facility that is on Van Aken and Lee Road in Cleveland. But my concerns started with serving at the Cleveland Christian Home on their board, and I joyfully asked to be a part of NBA. If I could be a part, I loved NBA. And the time I spent as their affirmative action officer and director of social services.
Thank you. I started at the NBA in August 1972. We was at 115 North Jefferson. I started as a secretary. I was interviewed by everybody at NBA, it seems. And I really didn't want the job. But the employment officer sent me there, so I had to accept the job. We moved from there out on Borman Drive. And I was like a ping pong. I worked in development, then I went to finance, then I went back to development, then back to finance. And I left finance in 2005. I have two stories about Mr. Lance. One, I was shocked. I saw him take his coat off and help Bill Heckenberg empty the trash. I'm thinking, this is the president? He's emptying the trash. My next story is, I loaned a friend of mine, I'm not calling any names, my car. Well, she started the car and it went through the window. It went airborne. Thank the Lord she wasn't hurt. Okay, so I go to the hospital with her. I come back, Mr. Lance wants to see me. I thought, okay, that's it. I'm gonna be fired. But he called me in He was very compassionate. He said, I know you're upset. Don't worry about the court. Do you have insurance? I said, yes. He said, then the insurance will fix the building. And NBA will help you get another car.
Those of us who worked for Rick knew that we were more than employees. We were individuals, and yes, we were. He created a sense of family at NBA, and that's what you're talking about. Let us hear from another.
Started with my wife coming to St. Louis to visit her parents, and I ended up with an interview. I started as director of budgets immediately after the interview. I went on to head of the accounting department, assistant treasurer, then on to treasurer, CFO, etc. I want to finish her story though, because that car going through the library window was driven by her best friend. And they are still best friends. So that's a part of the family that goes with this. Working for Rick was real easy. You just did what he asked. You know, he challenged us greatly to do things. And we grew the facilities we had. We started new facilities that were huge and a lot of senior residents. It was a challenge all the time, but a great challenge for all of us because we did love what we were doing, no question about it. And just a little piece about Rick, good friend, never forget him. But I also remember when it came time for birthdays in the kitchen, he was quite often the first one there for cake and ice cream. So he was very smart too.
We were on a trip in California, and we had dinner, and Rick drank a Diet Coke. And then for dessert, he had the biggest ice cream sundae, a zillion calories. He said, but I had a Diet Coke. So funny.
Again, my name is Mary Lou Kedron. I'm from Kansas City. And I still am a member of School Parkway United Christian Church, and at that particular time, when I joined the church, it was pastored by K. David Cole. He was an African-American male preacher, very down to earth, he was known across the Christian church, Disciples of Christ, by all folk, regardless of their color and regardless of their persuasion or whatever. He was a giant of a man. And before he came to a few of us in the church, and he said that he would like for us to start a facility, and that it would be for low-income housing people. And he was also concerned about members of our own church that may need housing when they turned age 65. And so that was my beginning to know anything about NBA. NBA came to Kansas City with several staff members. At this particular time, I cannot call their names, but they were great people to work with, and they gave us so much information that we were able to sell it to the entire congregation, and it was very, very simple. At this day and stage in life, K. David Cole Place, it was named after him, not because he wanted a named place after him, but because he was more concerned about the benevolent in the word of NBA. He was concerned about people who needed a place to sleep and could be in a comfortable place and didn't have to worry about what the other folk or whatever else was going on. And because of HUD facility, which to this day, when you walk in the place, you see a picture of K. David Cole. when I was there. Some people wanted to take that picture down, and we had to tell them, look, this is a giant of a man, and he is part of Christian Church Disciples of Christ. And as long as we are who we are, it's going to stay there, and it remains there. I'm going to say, I want to jump from that connection, because NBA for me is the place to go to. One of the ministries of the church where you honestly, we're helping other people. We have compassion for those that cannot help themselves. And this is what NBA means to me. And I didn't know Rick Lance at the time he was with NBA. But at one particular time, in being in Kansas City and being part of a group of people, this is when Rick and his wife moved to Kansas City. We, on the regional level, immediately asked him to come on board to help us save our camp and conference place. And we met with him, and this was the first time I'd ever met this man. But he was so warm, and he was so likable that we were able to connect. And I just thought, this is a great person. And when I found out that he was hooked up with NBA after my connection with NBA, I thought it all makes sense. It really does make sense. So thank you for sharing your husband with NBA. And daughter, thank you for sharing your dad with NBA. We appreciate it.
We do. Tall Oaks was very important to me.
It was Tall Oaks Conference Center. It was very important to him and to us.
Thank you, Mary Ruth. We're going to hear from Bob.
Yes, it's pretty easy for me to think about some of those giants that went ahead of us at the children's units, Don Brewer and John Bettine and Martin Pratt at Cleveland and St. Louis and Denver and Omaha. There were folks like Norma and Cheryl here in St. Louis, but scattered around the country. When I first came, it was, the Mark Palmers and the Donna Davis, Tubok Davis, Donna Hager, Beth Monteverde in Pittsburgh, Sue Cherney in Jackson, Mississippi, Dave Lundeen at Cleveland Christian Home. They were all giants in their field, not just within their own community here with NBA, but they were all known nationally for their leadership. And I think that's a heritage that lives on today with all of the folks that are currently at NBA. So sorry for the crack in my voice, but I think that commitment of families still sticks with everybody here today.
I'm not sucking up to my board member, Bob Cooper here, but when I mentioned that I had worked for NBA for a year and my responsibility was working with CEOs of many of the children's agencies, and Bob Cooper was one of them. Bob, Mark Palmer, a number of other leaders, as Bob had mentioned, just outstanding in their field, especially the children's program, in the child welfare arena. They were leaders across the country that people would turn to them around expertise. And I remember meeting Bob, meeting some of the others for the first time, just thinking, I don't know what I'm doing in this job. And Bob being very gracious and welcoming, and didn't pat me on the back and send me on my way, but very gracious as he continues to be today. And then the other thing I do want to lift up is Rick Lance. I did not have the pleasure of working for him or knowing him until I was called to this job in his position as president of NBA 6.5 years ago. And once I came in this role, I knew immediately that I wanted to make contact with Rick to go visit with him. He served as the president he was the third one back And so he had been retired for a while. But I knew I wanted to sop up his wisdom and his knowledge. And so again, walking into that first meal at the Olive Garden, he loved the Olive Garden is my impression, to meet him and just kind of being overwhelmed of, here's a giant whose shoulders I stand on, that we all stand on. And it was a beautiful encounter, and enjoyed my times when I got to see him. And today, as Bob mentioned, the family, and Janice, you have mentioned, the staff was a family and there was purpose, and really lived into what we do best as care. And I like to think that we are continuing in that legacy. So we still will use that term, what we do best as care, and also our term of call to care, call together, call to care, really I think embodies those folks that have gone before us.
I'd like to lift up 3 leaders I remember fondly and greatly admire. I would call them the affirmative action trailblazers. On the one hand is the late William K. Fox, Administrative Secretary of the National Convocation. And on the other hand are 2 NBA presidents, William Gibble and Richard Lance. When I think of these men, I think of these descriptors. First and foremost, they had integrity. You have to have it to lead. And they were courageous, innovative, strategic, and results-oriented. The first half of the Affirmative Action Trailblazers story starts in the late 1970s with Bill Gibble suggesting to Bill Fox that NBA could send the crusade funds raised in the 1950s for a Negro home for aged and a Negro home for children back to the convocation, thus enabling them to spend the funds in whatever way they deemed appropriate. Here comes the strategic part. When Bill Fox replied to Bill Gibble, and these aren't his exact words, but the essence, keep the funds within NBA and form a task force to decide how the funds could be used to promote affirmative action within NBA. Bill Gibble took Bill Fox's advice. The NBA National Convocation Task Force was formed. Upon Bill Gibble's retirement in 1982, Richard Lance became the NBA president. He took the affirmative action baton and ran with it, becoming not only a bold advocate for affirmative action, but also an innovator who got results. I like to say Rick used a carrot approach to lead in this new direction. He realized he could always use a stick later if he needed it. What was the carrot approach? He set a goal of 20% minority participation or more on NBA boards, employees, and residents. He offered tangible help from the central office in the form of affirmative action grants for pilot programs and the resources of the Director of Social Services, Patricia Clark. Pat served as a very effective bridge to minority constituencies. A brilliant thing that Rick did to advance affirmative action, and it was a little thing, was to publish NBA unit affirmative action statistics that were reviewed annually by the board and at staff conference. These published reports created positive peer pressure to have good stats in terms of affirmative action. By the end of Rick's tenure at NBA in 1996, NBA truly had moved from worst to first in affirmative action. Okay, let's now hear a voice of another wonderful leader of NBA ministries, the Reverend Belva Brown Jordan, who currently serves as the Dean of Students at Claremont School of Theology in Southern California. Reverend Jordan was a member of the NBA Blue Ribbon panel and has served as the chair of the NBA Board of Trustees. She is also the incoming moderator-elect for the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ.
I think we have to remember all those who came before us. The good, the bad, the ugly. We've got to remember it all. We don't need to dwell on it and let it weigh us down, but we need to remember that no matter what good we do in the present, it did not just spring up in the present. There was something that came before it. You know, it's like the seed was planted, and we're responsible for watering, but God is responsible for the growth. So I think remembering our history and drawing on the history that gives us life and that keeps us open to new vision.
What would you name from your years of service and leadership with Tennyson Center that is special or significant about the work that Tennyson has done and continues to provide? What does it mean that Disciples have had such strong commitments to children's care and direct services?
The first thing that came to mind for me when I looked at that question had to do with the same thing that I see on t-shirts out there, that hashtag. Now, I'm sure those little ladies didn't know what a hashtag was, but it may have been a pound sign for them, but she persists. The folks that started the Tennyson Center in 1904 persisted. They persisted in badgering NBA, who wasn't quite ready to come 800 miles west to Denver yet. And it took them a couple of years, but they persisted and joined forces with NBA. And I think that persistence is something that's continues on throughout the NBA and all its partner agencies. The second thing I think about is the willingness to adapt and change. Organizations that began in 1887 and 1904 and 1912 and a variety of other times for NBA and its partner organizations, they don't exist unless they're willing to adapt and change and have the leadership of boards and committed staff to make that change possible. The story in Denver is there used to be 14 church-related orphanages in the Denver area back in the 30s and 20s. And today there are just 2. And they were all church-related. They were equally divided amongst the Catholics and the Protestants. And the 2 that remain are equally divided between the Catholics and the Protestants. And they're here today because they didn't see themselves as orphanages. They saw themselves as serving children and families. And so they adapted and they changed. And they stopped being orphanages. They started becoming treatment centers for abused and neglected children, children with mental health issues, families with substance abuse problems, and problems that went way beyond that normally could be handled in other outpatient kinds of settings. And the other thing I think about is the symbiotic relationship that exists between places like Colorado Christian Home and the church. Why do I do that?
I don't know. But it's okay.
An NBA in the church. NBA couldn't be what it is. Colorado Christian Home couldn't be what it is without the support of the church. And I believe that the church couldn't be what it is without NBA and without the church, without Tennyson Center. So those are my thoughts about that.
I want to share a story of a disciple church lady down in Mississippi. How many of you know a person who's 102 years old, sings in 2 choirs, serves as president of a retirement organization, attends church regularly, is well-read, and in a word, lives life to the fullest. Well, I'm pleased to say I know such a woman, and her name is Ruth P. Hobbs, and she is a faithful supporter and advocate for children and youth. Ruth is a dear friend that I met as part of NBA's work in the southeastern part of the United States. After the old Southern Christian home in Georgia was sold in 1985, NBA established an endowment and a board, Southern Christian Services, to use the interest from the endowment to provide seed money for community-based programs for children and youth in those Christian church regions that historically had supported the old Southern Christian home. Ruth was the Mississippi region representative on the founding Southern Christian Services Board. She later served on the founding regional board that developed Southern Christian Services for children and youth in Mississippi in 1988. This was the first NBA children's unit in the Southeast, community-based care. Since that time, Ruth has served on the SCSCY board, and she has raised thousands of dollars for the agency. When she was 100 years old, I went down to Jackson to celebrate with them, and I learned about her annual Christmas Fund drive for SCSCY. And for the past 2 years at Christmas, I solicit a few of my friends and family to support Ruth. I have been surprised by the generosity of my friends who have little connection to this agency in Mississippi, of all places, yet they have been captivated by Ruth's total commitment to the vulnerable youth who are served by SCSCY, which is no longer certainly NBA affiliated. But to God be the glory, Bob, for the countless disciples who care so deeply for our children and realize that loving our children, that love is a verb requiring action. That's what Ruth would say. And now, here is a voice that many of you will know and may have worked with in the past, the Reverend Dr. Ben Boren, who served the NBA as Director of Church Relations for several years. Ben continues to support NBA by serving as a consultant and staff with the NBA Explore program, and we will be hearing from that program a little bit later. Here are some of his reflections.
Meeting disciples all around the United States, getting to know them well and seeing the way they would say, we didn't know this congregation's building was in this bad of shape. Oh, we'd love to help them do something. And so these were mostly small congregations, either in huge buildings or historic buildings, and they just didn't have the money to keep them up, and sometimes aging, so they didn't have the energy, the skills, and we'd have 400 people just, come into that place for a day. It took 9 months to organize and raise the money and figure out the work we could do and get the skilled people to come in as well as the unskilled people. But to do the opening worship service and then for people to just scatter like ants and bees, and they were everywhere working, and you'd have an 85-year-old who shouldn't be up on a ladder. So it's like, could you hold the ladder? Oh yes. And then you'd have a 3-year-old whose father was helping him paint the wall. And just to watch that kind of thing. One of my best memories was in Tucson, Arizona. I looked down and watched this, they were pouring cement. And there was this gentleman, probably 45, 50 years old, working with this little 6-year-old boy, showing him how to level the cement. Now, he was a district judge. The little boy was a 6-year-old Hispanic child. They did not speak the same language. They came from very different places in life, but there they were working together. And I just got this great joy on my face. And we saw that a lot, because when you're digging a ditch or painting a wall or cleaning a room, it doesn't matter. You're doing this together, and you start building relationships and friendships, and people, we do reunions, and people say, oh, remember when we did this in that room? So it was great to watch the transformation of the buildings, but also the transformation of the people who were involved.
With Ben's words and reflections, let us move to a question for Mary Lou. Please share with us a memory of how or why your church became involved with the opening of the K. David Cole Retirement Apartments in Kansas City. Would you also share your memories of being administrator and staff person in this community?
Our church became involved because of our pastor, K. David Cole, and he was a person that believed that once you reached a certain age that, and even if your income was not, if you had to move into what was considered quote-unquote low-income housing, that you still could have quality of life, and that the unit itself was top-notch. We at the church supported him in that effort, and NBA and our church hooked up together. When we started looking for locations in Kansas City, we came up on 2 different situations where we were told by the city that we could not build there. And so on the 3rd try, we found a place where it's currently located, and it is up and moving. K. David Cole Place was in an area that all races of people could live. And that's who K. David Cole was. He was the kind of person that he saw no color. When we got, we broke ground, I was on the board at that particular time, and we broke ground for K. David Cole. At that time, we had not named it that, but we eventually decided on a name. And K. David was, after we broke ground and after it was complete, during that period of time, K. David had left Kansas City, moving to California, and he was ill. And so just before, right after the whole situation was built, it was in July, and it was around my birthday, and K. David came back to cut the ribbon for the ceremony. And that was in July, and in January he passed. And so that has always kind of, you know, been an interesting thing for me. But he did live to see the groundbreaking. He did live to see the facility open, and it exists. There was a period of time after we broke ground that we ended up having a lot of administrators that, I mean, they were like revolving doors. And so I decided as a board member that I would, and I was chair of the board, I would step down and do an interim as the administrator, because I wanted to know, why is this so difficult and what's going on? And from that experience, I really found out more information than I really wanted to know. But I look at it like a 3-legged stool. There was HUD that has its regulations. There's the managing agent that has its regulations. And then there's the residents that they wanted to be heard and to be seen. And it was difficult at first to figure out how we can keep the 3-legged stool not from becoming lopsided. And we were able to figure it out. And I realized that each one of those groups of individuals, communities, they couldn't do it by themselves. And it took everybody working together to do the administration to do the managing agent and also to take care of the residents. So that's my experience. I enjoyed that. And I'm just going to say this, and I want to keep it real. During the bankruptcy, we were in an influx of what are we going to do. But you know what? I think that probably was from looking back on it and having all of the stuff go on. I think NBA right now is so much greater and so much better, having gone through that experience. Even the name change, we are so much better. And I think National Benevolent Association is one of the leading ministries of the church, Christian Church, Disciples of Christ. And because of the leadership team that's in place now, we're going to be fine. And if we're not going to be fine, the Holy Spirit is going to work on whoever is not fine and make them that way, okay?
I have so many fond memories of K. David Cole and his lovely wife, Vi. They were great, great friends of NBA. Let's thank our panel of storytellers. We also wanted time today to allow for some special voices to be heard. I'm going to invite the Explorer residents of the St. Louis Explorer House to come forward. You all have just completed 10 months of service, learning, spiritual and professional development. Will you share with us a few statements? What has the Explorer experience meant to you? What will you take away? Or what is a memorable joy from these past few months?
What that meant to me, the first word that popped into my mind, and it was kind of like the anthem of orientation week, was brave space. And brave space was described as that place where, you may not be sure about something, but you're brave enough to pursue or to express whatever that is. And it was in this program, and it was with these people that not only challenged me to be open and honest within this brave space, but it was the first time that my openness and my honesty, I felt like it was welcomed with open arms in a way that I had never been able to comfortably express before. I actually felt safe being in that brave space. And so that kind of opened up the way for this journey of honesty and openness and courage in all areas of my life. As far as one of the many things that I'll take away is living an intentional community. When you think, living a community, you're like, oh, I'm with all these people, I'm with people, that's community. There's a lot more to living in community than you anticipate. And I learned that sometimes the hard way, sometimes it just happened in the most beautiful of ways. And you've had to grow and be more considerate in ways that you've never realized before. And so being more intentional, not just in living in community, but with all of my relationships within my life, is something that this program has taught me. And this whole experience just completely reduces down to nothing but joy in my life. So that's what that's been for me.
We need to have you identify yourself and tell us where you are from and your student status. I'm not sure where you are in your life journey here.
Okay, my name is Rachel Wentworth. I come from Kewanee, Illinois, and I have graduated from Eureka College.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is William Jackson. I'm from New London, Missouri, and if you're not familiar with New London, most of you are familiar with Hannibal, Missouri. I do reside there as well. I am a senior music education major at Culver Stockton College. 4 years, I have a semester left, and praise be to God, it'll be done in December. What Explore has been for me has been also in the relationship to one of the hashtags of MBA, and that is called to care. I think about one of our pillars that talks about social justice and hands-on work. And I had said this before, but it was a time for me to finally get in touch with my black side. I grew up in the country area, and so I was one of 3 in my graduating class that was of color. And this was just not something that it was there, but it wasn't expressed, nor was it, nor could I dig into as much. And when I moved here, there were opportunities to go out, step out, get a little uncomfortable, and educate myself. And the further I've gotten along, I've also realized that I have a passion now for, of course, working with students, especially working with inner city students, and working with literacy, but also working with seniors, because I work with the senior community that is with the affordable housing units here in St. Louis. And that has been a matter of working with the church and talking with a few pastors, and that's just doing things for them that they themselves cannot have because of sometimes financial instability or anything else, or just there's not money for it. So in my projects, I've helped to build a vegetable garden, which will be completed Monday, move a piano over from this building over across to the Central West End area and provide devotional services, and record the life stories of certain individuals to be documented, have a vocal recording of it, and it's something that they can hold on to as well as their families at a time when, when we move on to glory. So they have a little bit, something else to hold on to. So that's been my Explore experience, and I will take away from the fact of the fight to keep learning more about my black self and to keep educating and fighting for the rights of others. Thank you.
My name is Alex Cooper. I am from Cleburne, Texas. Still have a couple years left of undergraduate work before I can continue on, so I'll be doing that whenever I get back from this program. For me, learning about Explore was actually the first time I had learned about the National Benevolent Association. So for me, this was a really cool way to not just learn about the organization that I'm now a part of, but to be able to just jump in and start doing the work that God has placed into this program. Kind of to go along with what William said about being called to care, I have learned this entirely new definition of what it means to love people, and what it means to care for people, and what it means to show up to events, to things that people just need people to be around. And so to hear these stories of NBA, what it's given me is it's given me a bigger picture of the 130 years that we've had together. To hear the struggles that the people have had, to hear the joys and the laughter, and to hear about Rick and all those great, wonderful stories. But I have developed this sense to no longer focus on what I want to do for myself, but what I want to do for other people. And so to have that being fostered in me has been truly the greatest joy that I've taken away from this program.
Months ago to this new journey, and we are so grateful. We pray blessings on your future journeys and where you will go next. To take us into the final part of our program today, let us hear from Mark Anderson, NBA President.
I think we have an overview video we're going to show you first, and then I'll wrap it up.
years, we've been working together to create
communities of compassion and care.
Y aún sabemos que hay mucho que hacer.
And yet, we know there is more to do.
We know that there is still so much more to do.
We invite you.
We invite you.
Le invitamos a que se una a nosotros.
We invite you to join us.
As MBA, we are called together.
We are called together and called to care.
Y llamados a cuidar.
And we're called to care.
I just wanted to highlight a little bit. There's information on the table. I think most of you have received a brochure and information about MBA. I'm not going into great details about it. You've kind of heard bits and pieces of the ministries today about how MBA continues to care for the least of these, continuing to do what we do best is care, continuing to be called together, to be called to care. The ministries of MBA are listed out here of how we're connecting health and social service ministries that are connected with disciples, churches, and regions and congregations. We talk about how we incubate new health and social service ministries that are starting out, as we've talked about on the panel here, kind of getting that head start, helping to walk alongside of organizations and ministries. And then having the joy of walking alongside of young folks who have said yes to 10 months of service with the Explore program. We are grateful for these three individuals that just spoke. I've heard them speak at numerous occasions for the past week and just am in awe every time they speak. And they are just one sampling of the Explore folks across this country. I wanted to ask you a question. So we are in the process of our strategic planning process as the board and as the staff, and we're going to be listening to people. So I wanted to ask this question that we're asking a number of folks, is what are the areas in your community where you live? It may be your neighborhood, it may be your city, it may be something larger that you consider a community, but where are the health and social service needs in your communities that you see? And we'll just kind of popcorn it.
Food security.
Food security. So people that are going hungry.
I guess water is.
And water. The lack of water.
Employment.
Employment. Lack of employment. Lack of skills for jobs that are available.
Affordable housing.
Affordable housing.
Lack of police participation.
Lack of police participation.
The issue, the need for intergenerational work with the community, not just the older people doing this or that, but all ages.
Amen.
Issues around mass incarceration and detention.
Educational enrichment.
Education enrichment. Can you talk about what you mean by education enrichment?
After school programs and cultural learning programs for children. Gun violence.
Gun violence.
Here in Missouri, there is a church that's associated with St. Louis University that's had a staff of volunteers and social workers helping people, regardless of where they came from in the community, helping them to get their credentials and papers like Social Security information or the documents to get Social Security things. They retired. There's a need in the community for people to be able to come and get that help. Getting citizenship, a green card, that kind of thing. Where to go?
Many good things are mentioned, but I would like to see your Explore program expand.
Okay. Association. But I do want to give a word of gratitude to Janice Lance. It has been a joy to see you as always. So thank you. Thank you. And a word of gratitude to Mary Lou and to Bob for their leadership with MBA, their leadership prior to MBA, and always grateful to, I love being on a panel with them. I'm never on a panel with them, so anytime I can be on a panel with them, I will. So thank you. I want to thank you for being present for today to celebrate 130 years. And as the video said, we are called together, called to care, but yet we know there is more to be done. We've done a lot in 130 years, but we know there's still more to do. So we're going to close our time together, and then there's refreshments, so mingle, enjoy. We're going to close our time with a reflection from a blessing statement from the Reverend Ben Bourne. We heard from him earlier, the Director of Church Relations for MBA. He continues to work with us with the Explore program, so we continue to reap his gifts, which we're grateful for. So we're going to close with a blessing on the 130 years of ministry. Gracious God, we look back to move forward, remembering all those who have come before us in MBA's 130 years of ministry. We remember the struggles, the successes, the growth, the transitions, and the innovations that have brought us here today. We celebrate the partnerships and collaborations that embody our vision of creating communities of compassion and care.
As we look ahead to the weeks, months, and years of ministry ahead, may the words of Jesus never allow us to do nothing. For I was hungry, and you fed me, thirsty, and you gave me drink, a stranger, and you welcomed me, sick, and you took care of me, naked, and you clothed me, in prison, and you visited me. Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it for me.
How wonderful that the ministries of MBA have known these words for 130 years. How wonderful that all of you gathered here could share your words and memories. Oh God, write these words on our hearts and remind us always of the work and care that we are called to continually do. In the name of the one who has called us to serve, amen.
Amen. Go in peace.